Good morning, young readers and writers. Today I want to talk to you about your Chapter 6 assignment, and I also want to talk to you about style today. So you will see an assignment posted that has to do with Chapter 6, and I'm going to go over that with you right now and then do a little mini lesson on style as well. And I'm going to keep this brief so that you have more time to work on your assignment. So for the directions, at the beginning of Chapter 6, when you read that today, you are going to see that Hattie writes Charlie a letter. And obviously this is not the first letter she has written him. She has written him several letters before in the book. For the most part, this letter at the beginning of Chapter 6 that you're going to read today summarizes what happened in Hattie's life in Chapter 5. So it's going to summarize events like the wolf attacking Violet. Or also Carl having to register as an alien enemy. So you're going to see those events, plus some other events that we didn't see her talk about in Chapter 5, but she's going to summarize for Charlie. So here's what I would like you to do. I would like you to read Chapter 6 today, the letter at the beginning, and obviously the rest of the chapter, all the way to page 75. And then you are going to write a letter from Hattie, so I need you today to pretend to be Hattie, not yourself, to Charlie, that's explaining to Charlie what happens in Hattie's life in Chapter 6. So it's going to be a similar letter to what you see at the beginning of Chapter 6, except you're going to write it at the end of Chapter 6. You're going to want to focus on pages 64 through 75. That's everything after the first letter in Chapter 6. Okay? You don't want to summarize the letter because she's already written that to Charlie. So here's your rubric for how you're going to do this. So your letter should summarize at least 5 main events from Chapter 6. So you want to think about what happens at the beginning of Chapter 6 all the way through the middle to the end of Chapter 6. You want to summarize those big ideas. I need to see at least 5 sentences about that for you to get full credit in this portion. Next, the letter is going to share Hattie's feelings about each of these events with at least 5 sentences. So you want to note how she's feeling about all those events. It doesn't have to be like, here's the event, here's the feeling, here's the event, here's the feeling. You could write it that way, but I'm just looking that overall you have at least 5 sentences that describe her feelings about what happens. It doesn't have to go back and forth between event, feeling, but it could if you wanted to. Letter structure is worth 2 points. So I'm looking for the date, place, greeting at the beginning, and closing in Hattie's name at the end. I did set this up for you. You will have to change the parts highlighted in pink. And by the way, she's written multiple letters before, so if you're not quite sure what to do or what that should look like, again, I would go back and encourage you to look at some of those letters that she's written, like on page 62 at the beginning of Chapter 6, she has written a letter. You could also go back and look at her letter on page 49. There's almost a letter in every chapter, so go back and look at those. All right, for date, she is going to tell you mostly the date. You have to use a little bit of inferencing, but I'm giving you a hint here. She should be writing this the day after this happens. Okay, so there's an event that happens in Chapter 6. You're going to write it the day after. And she tells you the date that it currently is, okay, on page 64, and it's a holiday of some sort. So you want to write it the day after the holiday. That should be your date. Okay, I'm not going to tell you any more than that. You'll need to read and find out. Place. You want to write it from where Hattie is living. So if you're not sure about that, really all you have to do is go to page 62, look at the place, and pretty much just copy that down. Greeting. Usually that's something like Dear Charlie, but if you want to get a little bit more creative and do something different, that's fine too. The content of your letter will start here, so you want to start typing here. Try to break it into paragraphs. Remember that we want to start a new paragraph every time we start a new idea. So if you're moving from one main thing that happened to a different main thing that happened, you want to try to break those up into paragraphs. I would like to see some effort there in doing that. Don't just make it one big blob. Okay, if you notice Hattie's, she's got multiple paragraphs. So on pages 62 to 64, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, okay, that she writes. At the end, you want to put some sort of closing. Hattie's had a couple different ways of closing her letters before to Charlie. So at one point she said your old friend. At one point she said your school chum. Okay, so it's up to you. You can do that. You can be creative there with your closing. It doesn't just have to be sincerely. Okay, and it probably shouldn't be because Hattie's style is a little bit more informal than that. And then you want to put Hattie's name here, not your own. Okay, you want Hattie's name here. You're pretending to be her today. Boys, I'm sorry, you have to pretend to be a girl today. So you're going to put yourself in her shoes. Okay, let's talk about style, and that's really the main thing that I want to talk about. So style. When we think of the word style, we usually think of fashion, right? Okay, so I'm actually going to draw that comparison today. So all of you have your own style. If we were to probably go and look in your closet or your dressers, we would find that not all of you have the same style. Okay, probably all of you have way different clothes from each other, and maybe some of you have a couple different styles. Maybe depending on the event or how you're feeling that day, you might dress differently too. So for example, if you consider yourself to be really athletic, your style might include more t-shirts and workout pants and that sort of thing, and tennis shoes. Okay. If you consider yourself to be someone who is more professional, you might see more dress-up clothes like nicer pants or shirt and tie, or you might see for girls like skirts and dresses and that sort of thing too. Okay. If you are someone who is really passionate about an event that you do or a team that you're on or some cause, whether it be political or environmental or something like that, then you might wear a lot of t-shirts or clothing that has some sort of message on them. So that might be part of your style too. Okay, now let's apply that to writing. How is that like writing? Well, authors have a writing style too, and you as an individual, when you write, you have a writing style as well. So instead of dressing your writing with clothes like we dress ourselves to express our personality and our style, you want to dress your writing with personality, okay, or with literary devices. So normally if we were in class, I would have you go through Hattie's letters and I would have you analyze her style. But due to the fact that we're doing this online learning right now in these hard circumstances, I've went through and I've given you some ways that you want to write that are like Hattie. So I'm going to talk about this today instead of us doing that together as a class. So here's what I've noticed about Hattie's writing. You probably have too. Hattie uses some wit and some humor. They're kind of the same thing. So what do you mean? She has these fun plays on words and she's clever, that sort of thing, but it's also humorous at the same time. So in at least one part of your letter, I want you to dress your letter, okay, with that style. I want it to have some wit, to have some humor from Hattie's perspective. Next, Hattie is optimistic in her letters. Yes, she might talk about difficulties she has, like Violet getting attacked by the wolf, okay? But she always has kind of a happy ending to that, or an optimistic ending to that. She finds something good in the situation. So if Hattie is talking about something that's difficult or hard, make sure you always have her have some optimism, some positivity at the end of it, because that is her style. And at least one piece of figurative language. You probably noticed too that Hattie uses a great deal of figurative language as well. So let me go through these, and I marked some in my book to talk to you a little bit more about these. So let's go back and talk about the wit. So for example, here's something that she says on page 50. You would think the cold weather might put a damper on the smells. She's talking about how the barn smells, and she goes, not so. So there's some wit or humor there. She sends a poem to Charlie on page 50 as well. It says, my Tuesdays are meatless, my Wednesdays are wheatless, I'm getting more eatless each day. So she shares some funny stories with him too. So some wit, humor, you want some of that in your letter. She sometimes uses sarcasm to get across that wit or humor as well. So on page 49, she says, you asked me to tell me more about my everyday doings. Such a life of glamour you cannot imagine. So we know that she's being sarcastic there, but it's funny at the same time because we know it's not glamorous, but she's making it sound glamorous. So some sarcasm. All right, optimism. Here are some example passages. So when she's talking about the snow and all the difficulties of homesteading and going out early in the morning to milk the cow, and Violet's not very cooperative, she says, sometimes I feel as if this Montana winter is Goliath and I am David. So that, shows her difficulty, but then she's optimistic. She says, I can only hope my ending is victorious as his, rather. Another example of optimism. She says, I'm being summoned. This will be a finished letter from my new home. I hope you don't get tired of reading these words, for I feel I should never tire of writing them. So here she still has this optimistic attitude that this is going to be a new home for her, a new start. She's really excited about it, despite the fact that this is after all the people on the train had warned her that it's going to be really hard and that the railroad pamphlets probably lied and she's probably going to be starving and having a hard time making enough money and also actually cultivating her land and proving up. So even after all that, she's still excited for her new home. She's still optimistic. All right, figurative language. We've spent a lot of time on figurative language, but here are a couple quick examples. So one, she says on page 14, Aunt Ivy would be as pleased as Mr. Whiskers with a mouthful of feathers to know I am in such a muddle. That's a simile, so she uses a simile there. She also likes to use quite a few idioms too. So for example, you'll see at the beginning of chapter 6, she calls Rooster Jim an odd duck, okay, which we know that she doesn't literally mean he's an odd duck, okay. When we say the phrase odd duck, it means that someone who is strange, who's different. Okay? It's also a metaphor, too. You could consider that a metaphor as well. And there are various other examples. So you guys know figurative language pretty well. You can pick from any of these. These are some of the ones I see how to use the most. Simile, metaphor, idiom, pun. But if you want to use something else like hyperbole, understatement, that's fine too. Okay, all until this is worth 20 points. If you have any questions about that, please hop on to Google Meet and let me know today. Have fun writing your letter and enjoy Chapter 6.